The lantern fell from her trembling hands, and the flames caught her dress before anyone could stop it. Sarah Zimmerman's screams echoed through the barn that September night in 1883, a sound that would haunt the small town of Naco, Arizona, for months to come. The left side of her face bore the cruel marks of that accident, scars that twisted from her temple down to her jawline, pulling at her once smooth skin, and leaving behind a patchwork of angry red tissue that would fade to pale white over time but never truly disappear. 6 months had passed since that terrible night. Sarah stood before the cracked mirror in her tiny room above the general store where she worked, her fingers tracing the ridges and valleys of her scarred cheek. She was 22 years old, and in her mind, her life had ended at 21. The pretty girl who had caught the eye of every young man in town had vanished in those flames, replaced by someone she barely recognized. She kept her hair long now, letting the dark brown waves fall forward to hide as much of the damage as possible. She wore high-collared dresses even in the brutal Arizona heat. She avoided looking at people directly, keeping her face angled away, her eyes downcast. The store owner, Mrs. Patterson, had been kind enough to let her stay on, but Sarah knew it was out of pity more than anything else. She worked in the back room now, organizing inventory and doing the bookkeeping, tasks that kept her away from customers who might recoil at the sight of her. The few times someone did see her face clearly, she watched their expressions shift from surprise to poorly concealed disgust, or worse, excessive sympathy that felt like another kind of rejection. She had accepted her fate. No man would want her now. The engagement to Thomas Wheeler had been quietly dissolved 2 months after the accident. He had been gentle about it, claiming that his family was moving to California, but Sarah knew the truth. She had seen it in his eyes the first time he visited her after the bandages came off. That initial shock, the way his gaze had skittered away from her face, the forced smile that did not reach his eyes. She had released him from his promise before he could do it himself, saving them both the awkwardness of the truth spoken aloud. The morning light filtered through her window, painting golden stripes across the worn floorboards. Sarah tied her bonnet carefully, making sure the brim shadowed the left side of her face, and made her way downstairs to begin another day of invisible work. The bell above the door chimed around mid-morning, and Sarah heard Mrs. Patterson's cheerful greeting. A deep voice responded, unfamiliar and rough, edged with the dust of long travel. Sarah continued counting tins of peaches, her pencil scratching across the inventory sheet. "Sarah, dear, could you come help me for a moment?" Mrs. Patterson called. Sarah's stomach tightened. She touched her bonnet to ensure it was properly positioned and stepped through the curtain that separated the back room from the main store. A tall man stood at the counter, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback. His hat was pushed back, revealing sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat at harvest. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with eyes that were startlingly blue against his tanned face. "This is Mr. Owen Oakley," Mrs. Patterson said. "He is looking for some supplies for the ranch he has just purchased outside of town. Could you help him with the list while I finish with Mrs. Henderson?" Sarah nodded mutely, keeping her scarred side turned away. She took the paper Owen offered, careful not to let their fingers touch, and studied the neat handwriting. It was a substantial order, enough supplies for several months. "You are new to Naco?" she asked quietly, her eyes on the list. "Arrived 3 days ago," Owen replied. His voice had a pleasant quality, warm and unhurried. "Bought the old Morrison place. Needs a lot of work, but the land is good." Sarah moved along the shelves, gathering items. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, dried beans, canned goods. Owen followed her, and she was acutely aware of his presence, tall and solid at her elbow. She kept her face angled away, her movements quick and efficient. "You know the area well?" he asked, making conversation as she worked. "I have lived here all my life." "Then maybe you could tell me where I might find good horses. I need at least 3 more to work the ranch properly." "Mr. Carson, 2 miles north. He has the best horses in the territory." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. She reached for a high shelf, stretching on her toes for a tin of tobacco. "Let me help you with that." Owen moved closer, his arm extending past her to easily grasp the tin. As he handed it to her, he shifted position, and suddenly they were face to face. Sarah's breath caught as his eyes met hers, and then inevitably traveled to the scarred left side of her face. She turned away quickly, her cheeks burning with humiliation beneath the damaged skin. "Thank you," she managed, moving swiftly back to the counter. She tallied the supplies with shaking hands, quoted him a price, and began wrapping the items in brown paper. Owen paid in cash, counting out the bills with calloused fingers. He did not mention what he had seen. He did not say anything at all, and somehow that silence felt worse than any words could have. As he gathered his packages and headed for the door, Sarah released a breath she had not known she was holding. Another person who had seen, another set of eyes that would look away. But Owen Oakley proved to be a frequent visitor to the general store over the following weeks. He always seemed to need something: another bag of nails, more coffee, extra rope. And he always asked for Sarah specifically, waiting patiently if she was busy, declining Mrs. Patterson's offers to help. At first, Sarah assumed he simply preferred consistent service, or perhaps pitied the scarred girl in the back room. But Owen never treated her with the careful, artificial kindness that pity brought. He talked to her about his ranch, about the repairs he was making to the old house, about his plans to raise cattle and horses both. "The roof was worse than I thought," he told her one afternoon in October as she measured out pounds of nails. "Had to replace nearly half the shingles. But the bones of the house are solid, built by someone who knew what they were doing." "The Morrisons were good people," Sarah replied. "They moved back east after their daughter married. Boston, I think. Long way from here." Owen leaned against the counter, relaxed and easy. "You ever think about leaving Naco?" The question startled her. She paused in her measuring, her eyes flickering to his face and then quickly away. "No, this is my home. Sometimes a fresh start can be good for a person." There was something in his tone that made Sarah wonder what kind of fresh start had brought Owen Oakley to Arizona. But she did not ask. It was not her place to pry, and she did not want to invite the kind of personal conversation that might lead to questions about her own past, about the accident, about why she hid in back rooms and avoided the world. November arrived with cooler temperatures and clear, brilliant skies. Sarah had grown almost comfortable with Owen's regular visits, though she still kept her scarred side turned away, still wore her bonnet even indoors when she knew he might arrive. He brought her small gifts sometimes, things he claimed were extra or surplus: a jar of honey from a neighbor's hive, a handful of pecans from a tree on his property. Once, a small blue flower he said he had found growing wild near the creek. "Thought you might like it," he said simply, setting it on the counter between them. "Seems wrong that something that pretty should be out there with no one to appreciate it." Sarah stared at the delicate petals, her throat tight with an emotion she could not name. No one had given her a flower since the accident. No one had thought her the kind of woman who might want such things anymore. "Thank you," she whispered, and allowed herself to meet his eyes for just a moment. He was smiling, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. Then she looked away again, old habits and deeper fears pulling her back behind her walls. The flower sat in a cup of water in her room for over a week, long after its petals had faded and fallen. It was a Friday afternoon in late November when the trouble started. Sarah was in the store alone, Mrs. Patterson having gone home early with a headache. 3 men came in, ranch hands from one of the larger spreads to the east, already drunk despite the early hour. Sarah recognized them as trouble immediately. She had grown adept at reading people from the corners of her vision, from the safety of her turned-away face. "Well, well," one of them drawled, a tall man with a scar across his knuckles and whiskey on his breath. "Where is the old lady? Mrs. Patterson is unavailable. May I help you find something?" Sarah kept her voice level, professional. "Oh, we know what we are looking for, do not we, boys?" The man elbowed his companions, and they laughed in that ugly way drunk men had. "But I do not think we have seen you before, honey. Why do not you come out here and show us what you got?" Sarah's hands clenched beneath the counter. "If you need supplies, I can help you. Otherwise, I will have to ask you to leave. Asking us to leave, that is not very friendly." The man started around the counter and Sarah backed up instinctively. "Come on, sweetheart, do not be shy. I said leave." Sarah's voice shook now, fear overriding her attempt at authority. "Just want to see what you look like under that bonnet." The man reached for her, and Sarah twisted away, but not quickly enough. His hand caught the brim of her bonnet and yanked it off, pulling her hair loose in the process. She stood there exposed, the scarred side of her face fully visible in the afternoon light streaming through the window. The man's expression changed instantly, going from leering to revolted. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, stepping back. "What the hell happened to you?" His companions had gone silent, staring. Sarah felt the familiar burn of shame and humiliation, but beneath it, something else was rising. Anger. These men had no right. They had come into this store drunk and threatening, and now they stood there looking at her like she was some kind of monster. "Get out." Her voice was quiet, cold. "Did not mean to bother you," the man said, and there was cruelty in his tone now, cruelty masquerading as apology. "If I had known you were hiding something like that, I would have kept my distance. Come on, boys, nothing worth looking at here." They left, laughing and making comments just loud enough for her to hear. Sarah stood frozen, her bonnet crushed in her hands, her chest heaving with suppressed sobs. She would not cry. She had promised herself she would not waste any more tears on people who could not see past her scars. The bell chimed again, and Sarah spun around, ready to order them out if they had returned. But it was Owen Oakley who stepped through the door, his arms full of packages to mail. He took one look at her face, at her expression, at the bonnet in her trembling hands, and his jaw tightened. "What happened?" he asked, setting the packages down carefully. "Nothing. It was nothing." Sarah turned away, trying to smooth her hair to cover the scarred side of her face with the dark waves. "Sarah." Owen's voice was gentle but firm. He moved closer and she felt him behind her, a solid presence. "Tell me what happened. Some men came in. They were drunk. They left. It is over." She could not keep the bitterness from her voice. "Did they hurt you?" "They did not have to." The words burst out before she could stop them. All they had to do was look. She heard Owen exhale slowly. Then his hand was on her shoulder, warm and steady, turning her gently to face him. Sarah resisted, but he was patient, waiting until she finally gave in and let herself be moved. She kept her eyes down, unable to bear whatever expression she would see on his face. "Look at me," Owen said softly. "No, please, Sarah, look at me." She raised her eyes slowly, defiantly, ready for the pity or disgust or whatever else he might be feeling. But Owen's blue eyes held only a fierce kind of tenderness that made her breath catch. His hand lifted from her shoulder, and she flinched. expecting him to draw back now that he had a clear view of her ruined face in the full light of day. Instead, his fingers touched her scarred cheek with infinite gentleness, tracing the ridged skin from temple to jaw. "My face was burned," Sarah said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "No one will want me. I am hideous. I frighten children. Men turn away. Even my own fiancé could not stand to look at me after it happened." Sarah. Owen's thumb brushed across her cheekbone and his eyes never left hers. "I see only you." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Sarah tried to turn away, tried to hide even this raw emotion, but Owen would not let her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while she wept. She soaked the front of his shirt with 6 months of grief and loneliness and rage, and he simply held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. When the storm finally passed, Sarah pulled back, mortified. "I am sorry. I should not have done that." "You should have done it a long time ago." Owen's hands framed her face, his thumbs wiping away the last tears from both cheeks, treating the scarred skin with the same tenderness as the unmarked. "Sarah, when I look at you, I see a woman who is brave and kind. I see someone who has survived something terrible and kept going. I see beautiful brown eyes and a smile that makes my day brighter when you let it show. The scars are part of your story, but they are not all of who you are. You cannot mean that." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You cannot possibly find me attractive. I have been trying to figure out how to court you properly for the last month," Owen said, and there was a hint of a smile in his voice. "I kept hoping you would give me some sign that you might welcome my attention, but you barely look at me long enough for me to catch your eye." "You want to court me," Sarah repeated, certain she had misunderstood. "But why would you want someone like me when you could have any whole, normal woman?" "Because I do not want any other woman. I want you." Owen's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I know this is sudden. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I would like the chance to prove to you that I mean what I say." Sarah searched his face, looking for deception or pity or any of the false emotions she had learned to recognize. But Owen met her gaze steadily, openly, his expression honest and hopeful. Something deep inside her chest, something that had been frozen and dead since the night of the fire, stirred and warmed. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to be courted anymore, how to be the kind of woman a man wants to spend time with." "Then we will figure it out together." Owen smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and lighter. "Sarah Zimmerman, may I have permission to call on you properly? To take you to dinner, perhaps, or for a ride in my wagon?" The word yes trembled on her lips, but fear held it back. "People will talk. They will say cruel things. They will wonder what is wrong with you for wanting to be seen with me. Let them talk. I have never cared much for other people's opinions." Owen took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "The only person whose opinion matters to me is yours." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the way his calloused palm cradled hers so carefully. She thought about the months of loneliness, of hiding, of believing herself unworthy of love or affection. She thought about the blue flower in the cup of water, about the way Owen always asked for her specifically, about the gentle touch of his hand on her scarred cheek. Perhaps she had been so busy protecting herself from pain that she had missed the possibility of something good. "Yes," she said finally, the word barely audible. "Yes, you may call on me." Owen's smile blazed like the Arizona sun. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles in a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that Sarah felt heat rise in her unmarked cheek. "Would tomorrow evening be too soon? I could borrow a proper buggy from my neighbor, take you to the hotel restaurant for dinner." "I have not been to the restaurant since the accident." Sarah's anxiety rose immediately. Everyone will stare. Then they will stare. Owen squeezed her hand. But I will be right there with you, and I will not let anyone make you feel less than the remarkable woman you are. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of panic and anticipation. Sarah went through her small wardrobe a dozen times, trying to find something suitable, something that might make her look less damaged. Everything seemed wrong. Too fancy, too plain, too bright, too drab. In the end, she chose a simple dress in deep green wool with a high collar and long sleeves, practical but well made. She spent extra time on her hair, pinning it carefully to let it fall forward over her left cheek, while still looking intentional rather than like she was hiding. Mrs. Patterson had been delighted when Sarah told her about the dinner, practically shooing her out of the store early to get ready. "That Owen Oakley is a good man," she had said firmly, "and he clearly has excellent taste." Now, as Sarah heard the buggy pull up outside, her courage nearly failed. She could stay here, safe in her little room where no one would stare or whisper or pity. But Owen was climbing down from the buggy, straightening his jacket, clearly having made an effort to look his best. He wore a clean white shirt, a dark vest, and a string tie, his hair neatly combed beneath his hat. When he looked up and saw her in the window, his face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Sarah found herself moving toward the door despite her fear. "You look beautiful," Owen said when she opened the door, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe he meant it. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." Sarah accepted his hand as he helped her into the buggy, trying to ignore the way her heart raced at the simple contact. The restaurant at the Naco Hotel was the finest dining establishment in town, which admittedly was not saying much. But the tables had white cloths, and someone had placed small vases with desert flowers as centerpieces. As Owen and Sarah entered, conversations paused. Heads turned. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her exposed face, on her scars, on the shocking sight of someone like her daring to appear in public, as though she were a normal woman on a normal outing with a normal man. Owen either did not notice or did not care. He kept his hand on the small of her back, steady and reassuring, as he requested a table near the window. The server's eyes widened when she got a full view of Sarah's face, but Owen's level stare seemed to remind her of her manners. She seated them promptly and took their order for coffee while they studied the menu. "The steak is supposed to be good here," Owen said conversationally, as though they were not the subject of intense scrutiny from every other patron in the room. "I have not tried it in a long time," Sarah admitted. She could feel the stares like physical touches, making her skin crawl. Her instinct was to turn away to hide, but Owen sat across from her in a position where she had to face him, which meant facing the room as well. "Then we should both try it. My treat, of course." Owen set down the menu and leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "Tell me something about yourself that I do not know yet. Something that has nothing to do with Naco or the store or anything to do with your work." The question surprised her. "I do not know what you want to know. Anything. Your favorite color, what you like to read, your dreams when you were a little girl." Owen's eyes were warm, interested. "I want to know who Sarah Zimmerman is when she is not hiding behind a counter or a bonnet." Sarah hesitated, unused to talking about herself, unused to anyone caring about such things. "I like to read," she said finally. "Novels, mostly. Mrs. Patterson lets me borrow from her collection. I have read everything by Charles Dickens at least twice." "A Tale of Two Cities is my favorite," Owen said, although Great Expectations is a close second. They spent the next hour talking about books, about the stories they loved and the characters who had stayed with them. Sarah found herself relaxing despite the occasional stares, caught up in the pleasure of talking with someone who actually listened, who asked questions and remembered her answers. Owen had read widely for a ranch hand, and she said as much. "My mother was a school teacher," Owen explained. "She made sure I learned to read well and often. Books were precious in our house, more valuable than almost anything else." Is she gone?" Sarah asked gently. Owen nodded, his expression becoming somber. "5 years ago. Influenza took both my parents within a week of each other. That is part of why I came to Arizona. Too many memories back in Texas. I am sorry." Sarah reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. Owen turned his palm up, catching her fingers, and they sat there holding hands across the table while the restaurant buzzed with whispers around them. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, continuing to talk. Owen told her about his plans for the ranch, about the cattle he hoped to buy in the spring, about his dream of raising horses known throughout the territory for their quality. Sarah found herself sharing things she had not told anyone in months, about how much she missed going riding in the hills, about the watercolors she used to paint before the accident left her too self-conscious to go outdoors and find subjects. "You paint?" Owen's interest was immediate and genuine. "I would love to see your work sometime." "They are not very good," Sarah demurred, but she felt a flutter of pleasure at his interest. "I doubt that." Owen finished his steak and set down his fork. "Sarah, will you do me the honor of taking a walk with me? It is a beautiful evening, and I am not ready for this night to end yet." The directness of his words, the open admission that he enjoyed her company and wanted more of it, made Sarah's breath catch. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." They walked down the main street of Naco in the cool November evening, the sky above them vast and studded with stars. Owen kept a respectful distance, not touching her except when he offered his arm over rough ground. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily between them. Sarah realized with a start that she was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time since the accident. The scars on her face felt less important here in the darkness, with this man who looked at her as though she were whole and worthy. When they reached the steps to her room above the store, Owen took both her hands in his. "Thank you for taking a chance on me tonight," he said quietly. "I know it was not easy for you." "Thank you for wanting to take that chance," Sarah replied. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a normal person." "You are not normal," Owen said, and Sarah's heart sank until he continued. "You are extraordinary. Normal people would have given up after what you went through. You survived and you kept going, and that takes a strength most people will never have." He lifted her hand to his lips again, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I see you again soon?" "Yes." Sarah smiled, a real smile that showed her teeth and crinkled her eyes, and she saw answering delight in Owen's expression. "I would like that very much." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. Owen came to town 3 or 4 times a week, always finding excuses to visit the store but making his real purpose clear. He brought her small gifts, thoughtful things that showed he paid attention. A book of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. A new set of watercolor paints when she mentioned hers had dried out. A warm shawl in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. They went for drives in his wagon, exploring the countryside around Naco. Owen showed her his ranch, the house he was working so hard to restore, the land he was slowly bringing to order. Sarah felt her love for painting rekindled as she saw the landscape through fresh eyes, the way the light hit the distant mountains, the colors of the desert in winter. Owen found her an old easel in his barn and set it up in a spot with the best light, insisting she should use his ranch as her studio whenever she wanted. "You should be creating," he told her firmly. You have an artist's eye, Sarah. Do not let fear steal that from you too. So Sarah painted. At first she was rusty and uncertain, her hands remembering skills her mind questioned. But slowly, the confidence returned. She painted the mountains at sunset, the creek that ran through Owen's property, the wild horses she spotted on a distant ridge. Owen would work on the ranch while she painted, but often she would look up to find him watching her, his expression soft and wondering. December arrived with colder nights and the occasional threat of rain. Sarah and Owen had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, seeing each other several times a week, talking for hours about everything under the sun. He had kissed her for the first time in mid-December, a gentle press of lips as they stood by his wagon in the evening light. Sarah had tensed, waiting for him to pull back in disgust when he got close to her scars, but Owen had only smiled against her mouth and kissed her again, deeper this time, his hand cupping the scarred side of her face with reverent tenderness. "I love you," he had whispered against her lips. "I have loved you since the first time I saw you trying to hide behind that bonnet." "I love you too," Sarah had replied, the words feeling both terrifying and wonderful. "I did not think I would ever say that to anyone again." Now, as Christmas approached, Owen had asked Sarah to come to dinner at his ranch. He had been mysterious about it, saying only that he had something important to discuss with her. Sarah's nerves were stretched tight as she rode beside him in the wagon, watching the familiar landscape roll past. The house looked beautiful in the fading light. Owen had been working on it steadily and the repairs showed. Fresh paint, new shutters, a porch that no longer sagged. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth inside. Owen helped Sarah down from the wagon and led her to the door with an odd mixture of excitement and nervousness that she did not quite understand. Inside, Sarah gasped. The main room had been transformed. The furniture was simple but sturdy, clearly new. Curtains hung at the windows and a fire crackled in the hearth. But what caught her attention was the small table set for two, covered in a white cloth with candles and more of the wild desert flowers Owen knew she loved. "Owen, this is beautiful," Sarah breathed. "I wanted it to be special." Owen helped her remove her coat, then led her to the table. The meal was simple but well prepared, and Sarah suspected Owen had gotten help from one of his neighbors who knew how to cook better than he did. They ate and talked, but Sarah could sense Owen's nervous energy, the way he seemed to be waiting for something. After dinner, Owen took her hand and led her to the fireplace. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about why I came to Naco." Sarah's stomach tightened. Was this where he revealed some dark secret, some reason why he had been content to court a scarred woman when he could have had better? "I came here to escape my past," Owen said slowly. "I was engaged to be married back in Texas. Her name was Margaret, and I thought I loved her. But a month before our wedding, I discovered she had been seeing another man, someone with more money and better prospects. She broke off our engagement and married him instead." "Owen, I am so sorry," Sarah said softly. "I was devastated at the time. I thought my life was over, that I would never trust anyone again. That is why I came to Arizona, to start fresh where no one knew me or my history." Owen looked into her eyes, his expression intense. "But now I am grateful to Margaret for breaking my heart, because if she had not, I would never have come here. I would never have met you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sarah's heart began to pound as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. "Sarah Zimmerman, I know we have not been courting very long by traditional standards, but I know what I feel and I know what I want. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to support your painting and watch you become the artist I know you can be. I want to prove to you every single day that you are beautiful and worthy and loved." Owen dropped to one knee, holding the ring up to her. "Will you marry me?" Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. This was everything she had thought she could never have, everything the accident had stolen from her. And here was this good, kind man offering it all back, offering her a future she had stopped daring to imagine. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." Owen surged to his feet, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. He set her down gently and slid the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a passion and tenderness that made her believe in happy endings again. They were married in January of 1884 in a small ceremony at the church in Naco. Sarah wore a simple dress in cream-colored silk, her hair arranged carefully but not hiding her face anymore. She had learned from Owen that hiding only gave power to those who wanted her to be ashamed. She walked down the aisle with her head high, her eyes on the man who loved her, and if anyone whispered or stared, she did not care. Owen's face when he saw her was all the approval she needed. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony. A few of Owen's neighbors attended, good people who had welcomed Sarah when Owen brought her around. The service was simple and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her soundly, earning a few chuckles from the small congregation. The ranch house became Sarah's home, and she found herself transformed. She still had moments of self-consciousness, times when she caught her reflection unexpectedly and flinched at the scars. But Owen's steady love and acceptance slowly healed wounds deeper than the ones on her face. He never treated her scars as something to ignore or look past. He touched them as naturally as he touched any other part of her, kissing her scarred cheek as often as her unmarked one, his hands on her face always tender and admiring. "You are beautiful," he would tell her, and after months of hearing it, Sarah began to believe him. She set up a proper studio in the small second bedroom, painting whenever the light was good and inspiration struck. Owen proved to be her best supporter, praising each completed work and insisting several were good enough to sell. When a traveling merchant expressed interest in 3 of her landscape paintings, offering a price that shocked Sarah, Owen's pride was almost comical. "I told you," he crowed, sweeping her into his arms. "I told you that you had real talent." The ranch prospered under Owen's careful management. He had a gift for working with horses, a patience and understanding that produced animals known for their temperament and training. People began coming from towns as far as 50 miles away to buy horses from the Oakley ranch. The cattle herd grew steadily as well, and by their first anniversary, they were financially secure enough to make improvements to the house and purchase more land. Sarah had worried that the physical side of marriage might be difficult for Owen, that he would struggle to find her attractive in the ultimate intimacy. But Owen had been gentle and patient on their wedding night, taking his time, worshiping every inch of her with his hands and mouth, and showing her that desire had nothing to do with surface scars and everything to do with connection and love. She learned to trust him completely, to let go of the fear that he secretly found her repulsive. His passion was too real, too honest to be faked. In the spring of 1885, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She shared her fears with Owen one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "What if the baby is frightened of me?" she asked quietly. "What if my scars scare our own child?" Owen pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "Our child will grow up seeing your face every day, loving you from the moment they enter the world. Your scars will just be part of Mama, nothing scary or strange, just part of who you are." What if there are complications? What if I pass something on? Sarah, you are going to drive yourself crazy with what ifs. Owen turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. We cannot control everything, but we can love this baby with everything we have, and we can trust that we will figure out the rest as we go. Doctor Mitchell in town confirmed the pregnancy and assured Sarah she was healthy. The pregnancy progressed normally, and Sarah bloomed, her fears gradually giving way to excitement. Owen built a cradle in the barn, sanding the wood to satin smoothness and carving small horses along the rails. Sarah sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her heart full of hope. Their son was born in November of 1885, a healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him James, and from the moment Owen placed the baby in Sarah's arms, she knew her fears had been unfounded. James looked at her with the uncritical adoration only a newborn could give, and as he grew, her scars were simply part of his mother's face, nothing worthy of comment or concern. Owen was a devoted father, taking to the role with the same patience and care he brought to everything else. He would walk the floor with James at night when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the boy fell asleep. He built toys and insisted on being present for every milestone, every small triumph. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1887, they had 3 men working for them, good hands who respected Owen and treated Sarah with courtesy. She had overcome her fear of meeting new people, helped by Owen's unwavering support and her own growing confidence. When people stared at her scars, she learned to meet their eyes calmly, no longer ashamed. Let them look. She was a successful artist, a rancher's wife, a mother. The fire had marked her skin, but it had not destroyed her. In 1888, Sarah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult, with bouts of sickness that lasted well into the 4th month. But she gave birth to a healthy daughter in the spring of 1889, a girl with Sarah's brown eyes and delicate features. They named her Emma, and Owen declared her the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, apart from her mother. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the horses and listening to his mother's stories. Emma was quieter, more thoughtful, often content to sit beside Sarah in the studio and draw on scraps of paper while her mother painted. The children never questioned Sarah's scars, accepting them as naturally as Owen had taught them to. Sarah's paintings gained recognition beyond Naco. A gallery owner in Tucson expressed interest in showing her work, and soon she was selling pieces regularly. The extra income was welcomed but unnecessary. Owen's horse breeding program had become so successful that they were turning away buyers, able to be selective about who purchased their animals. In 1892, when James was 7 and Emma was 3, the ranch faced its greatest crisis. A drought had been building for months, the worst anyone in the area could remember. The creek that ran through their property slowed to a trickle, and the grass turned brown and brittle. Other ranchers began selling off their herds, unable to keep them watered and fed. Owen called a family meeting at the dinner table one evening, his expression serious. "We need to make some decisions," he said. "The drought could break next month or it could last another year. We have enough water stored to keep the horses alive, but the cattle will have to go. I can sell them now for a fair price, or we can wait and hope for rain." "What do you think is best?" Sarah asked. "Selling now is the safe choice. It means we will definitely survive even if the drought continues. But the horses are what I really care about, what we have built our reputation on. If we sell the cattle, we can focus all our resources on protecting the breeding program. Then sell the cattle. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "We started this ranch with nothing but hope and hard work. We will get through this the same way." Owen sold the cattle herd within a week, getting a decent price from a buyer who was driving them north to better grazing. The money gave them a cushion, enough to buy supplemental feed for the horses and keep the household running. But as summer turned to fall and fall to winter with no significant rain, even the optimistic began to worry. Sarah continued to paint, her work taking on a starker quality that reflected the harsh landscape around them. She painted the cracked earth, the struggling plants, the way the light looked different in the dust-thick air. A collector in Phoenix bought 6 paintings from this period, calling them powerful and evocative. The rain finally came in January of 1893, a slow, steady precipitation that lasted for 3 days. Sarah and Owen stood on their porch, watching the water soak into the thirsty ground, feeling the tension of the past year slowly release. James and Emma danced in the rain, their laughter bright with relief. "We made it," Owen said, pulling Sarah close. "I had some doubts there for a while, but we made it. We always will." Sarah leaned into him, watching their children play. "As long as we are together." The ranch recovered quickly once the rains returned. The grass came back green and thick, and Owen began rebuilding the cattle herd, though he kept it smaller than before, focusing primarily on the horses. Sarah's art continued to sell well, and they found themselves not just comfortable but prosperous. In 1895, Sarah received an invitation that shocked her. A gallery in San Francisco wanted to host a showing of her work, a full exhibition featuring 20 of her paintings. The opportunity was enormous, the kind of recognition most artists dreamed of. But it meant traveling to California, being seen by hundreds of people, subjecting herself to the scrutiny of art critics and collectors who would certainly comment on her appearance. "I cannot do it," Sarah told Owen when the letter arrived. "It is too much, too many people." "Sarah, this is your dream. You have to at least consider it." Owen set down the letter and took her hands. "I know you are afraid, but you have come so far. You cannot let old fears hold you back from this. What if they focus on my scars instead of my art? What if all anyone talks about is what is wrong with my face? Then they are fools who do not deserve your time or attention." Owen pulled her close. "But I do not think that will happen. Your work is too good. Anyone who looks at your paintings will see the skill and passion in them. The scars are just part of your story, Sarah. They do not define you." After days of agonizing, Sarah accepted the invitation. The entire family traveled to San Francisco in the summer of 1895, making an adventure of it. The children, now 10 and 6, were thrilled by the train journey and the big city. Owen held Sarah's hand through all of it, steady and supportive. The gallery showing was more successful than Sarah had dared to hope. The paintings sold well, and the reviews in the newspapers were glowing, focusing entirely on her talent and unique perspective. A few people asked about her scars, but most seemed genuinely interested in her work. Owen stayed by her side throughout the opening, proud and protective, and Sarah found herself actually enjoying the experience. On their last night in San Francisco, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out at the lights of the city, Sarah realized how far she had come from the terrified girl hiding in the back room of a general store. "Thank you," she told Owen, leaning against him, "for everything. For seeing past the scars, for believing in me when I could not believe in myself." "You did the hard work," Owen replied, kissing her temple. "I just reminded you of what was always there." They returned to Naco as minor celebrities, even Mrs. Patterson, now semi-retired and letting her daughter run the general store, crowed about having known Sarah since before she was famous. Sarah took it all with good humor, grateful but ultimately more interested in getting back to her family and her quiet life on the ranch. The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and ordinary joys. James grew into a young man who shared his father's gift with horses, working the ranch alongside Owen and dreaming of the day it would be his to run. Emma developed a talent for music, and Sarah and Owen scraped together enough money to buy a piano and arrange for lessons in town. In 1900, on their 16th wedding anniversary, Owen gave Sarah a portrait he had commissioned from a photographer in Tucson. It showed the whole family, posed in front of the ranch house. Sarah had initially resisted, not wanting her scars immortalized in a photograph, but Owen had insisted, and now she was glad. The photograph captured James at 15, already tall and serious, and Emma at 11, all smiles and energy. Sarah and Owen stood behind them, his hand on her shoulder, both of them looking content and prosperous. Sarah's scars were visible in the photograph, but they seemed less important somehow, just one small detail in a larger picture of a life well lived and a family full of love. Sarah studied the photograph often, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. She thought sometimes about the night of the fire, about those terrible months when she had believed her life was over. She thought about Thomas Wheeler, who had walked away, and felt only gratitude that he had. If he had stayed, if he had married her out of obligation or pity, she would never have known this kind of love, this partnership with Owen that was based on genuine admiration and affection. The scars had faded over the years, becoming less angry and red, settling into pale lines and patches of shiny skin. They were still noticeable, still the first thing many people saw when they looked at her. But Sarah had learned that the people who mattered, the people worth knowing, looked deeper. They saw the artist, the mother, the woman who had survived and thrived despite tragedy. In 1902, James married a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Catherine who loved horses almost as much as he did. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half of Naco in attendance. Sarah worked for weeks preparing for the event, cooking and decorating and making sure everything was perfect. On the day itself, she stood beside Owen and watched their son exchange vows, her heart full almost to bursting. "We did good," Owen whispered to her as James kissed his bride. "He is a fine man." "He learned from the best," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. Emma, now a lovely young woman of 13, helped her mother host the reception, charming guests and making sure everyone had food and drink. Sarah watched her daughter move through the crowd with confidence and grace, and silently thanked Owen for teaching their children to see past surface appearances, to value character and kindness above all else. James and Catherine built a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work but far enough for privacy. In 1903, they welcomed their first child, a boy they named Owen after his grandfather. Sarah held her grandson for the first time and wept, overcome by the realization that she was part of a legacy now, part of a family that would continue long after she was gone. Owen, now in his mid-40s, had gone gray at the temples, and his face bore deep lines from years of work in the sun. But to Sarah, he was as handsome as the day they met. He still looked at her with love and desire, still touched her scars with tender familiarity, still told her she was beautiful. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked him one evening as they sat on their porch, a habit they had maintained throughout their marriage. "Marrying someone like me, the stares we got in those early years, the questions." "Never." Owen's answer was immediate and firm. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah. Marrying you was the smartest decision I ever made. But surely there were times when you wished I looked different, when you were embarrassed by my scars." Owen turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Listen to me carefully, because I need you to hear this. Your scars are part of you, part of your story, part of what made you the strong, compassionate, incredible woman you are. I would not change a single thing about you. Not one line, not one mark. Because all of it together makes you who you are, and who you are is the person I love more than anything in this world." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, even after all these years, still moved by his words. "I love you too, more than I can ever say." "Then stop saying it and show me," Owen teased, pulling her close for a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their long marriage. Emma left for college in 1906, heading to a school in California that specialized in music. Sarah missed her daughter desperately, but was proud of her courage and determination. Emma wrote home regularly, sharing stories of her classes and her life in the city. She came home for holidays and summers, bringing new songs to play on the piano and stories that made them all laugh. James and Catherine had 3 more children over the years, giving Sarah and Owen a house full of grandchildren to spoil. The ranch house was often full of noise and laughter as the family gathered for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Sarah painted portraits of each grandchild, capturing their personalities and preserving these moments in oil and canvas. In 1910, Sarah received word that there would be another showing of her work, this time in Denver. She was 69 years old now, her hair gone completely gray, her body showing the wear of a life fully lived. But her art had not diminished with age. If anything, her paintings had grown more powerful, more confident, reflecting a lifetime of seeing the world with an artist's eye. The Denver showing was another success. Sarah and Owen traveled there together, making the long journey by train. They stayed in a fine hotel and attended parties with wealthy collectors and art critics. Sarah no longer feared the stares or the questions. She had lived too long and loved too well to care what strangers thought of her appearance. On the last night in Denver, at a dinner hosted by the gallery owner, a young woman approached Sarah. She was perhaps 25, with terrible burn scars covering the right side of her face and neck. She looked terrified but determined. "Mrs. Oakley," the young woman said, her voice trembling, "I wanted to thank you. Your paintings, your story, they have given me hope. I was burned 2 years ago and I thought my life was over. But seeing you, seeing what you have accomplished, knowing that you found love and happiness despite what happened to you, it has made me believe that maybe I can too." Sarah felt emotion swell in her chest. She took the young woman's hands in hers. "What is your name?" "Elizabeth." "Elizabeth Martin." "Elizabeth, I want you to listen very carefully to me. Your scars do not define you. They are part of your story, but they are not the whole story. The right person, the person who deserves you, will look past the scars and see the woman beneath. Do not settle for less than someone who loves all of you, including the parts you think are damaged." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "But how do you find someone like that? How do you trust that they really see you?" Sarah looked over at Owen, who was watching from across the room with that same expression of love and pride he had worn for 26 years. "You will know," she said simply. "When someone truly sees you, truly loves you, you will feel it. Do not give up hope, Elizabeth. Your happy ending is out there waiting for you." The young woman thanked her profusely and left, but Sarah thought about that encounter for days afterward. She had become, without intending to, a symbol of hope for others who bore visible scars. It was a responsibility she had never sought, but one she embraced. If her story could help even one person believe in the possibility of love and happiness after tragedy, then perhaps all the pain and fear of those early years had served a greater purpose. Emma graduated from college in 1911, and returned to Naco with a degree in music and a fiancé she had met at school. He was a teacher, quiet and intellectual, with a deep love for Emma's talent and personality. Sarah liked him immediately, recognizing in his eyes the same look Owen had always given her, that look of genuine admiration and love. The wedding was held at the ranch in the fall of 1911, another joyous celebration that brought the whole family together. Sarah was grandmother to 7 grandchildren now, with another on the way. The ranch had grown to encompass over 2,000 acres, employing a dozen hands and producing some of the finest horses in the territory. Sarah's paintings hung in galleries across the West, and she had established a reputation as one of the premier landscape artists of her generation. But all of those accomplishments, as satisfying as they were, paled in comparison to the simple joy of her marriage. Owen was 63 now, his body showing the strain of decades of ranch work. He moved a little slower, needed reading glasses for small print, complained about his knees on cold mornings. But he still woke beside Sarah every day, still kissed her good morning, still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. In 1915, Arizona became a state. Sarah and Owen attended the celebrations in Phoenix, part of a contingent from Naco. It felt fitting somehow, this recognition of growth and change, this acknowledgement of how far they had all come. That evening, standing on another hotel balcony looking out at the celebrations in the streets below, Sarah reflected on the journey. She was 74 years old, had been married for 31 years, had raised 2 children and watched 7 grandchildren grow. She had survived a devastating accident, overcame crippling self-doubt, and built a career as an artist. She had loved and been loved, deeply and truly. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, joining her at the railing. "How lucky I am," Sarah said simply, "that I was brave enough to say yes when you asked to court me, that I did not let fear win." "I am the lucky one," Owen countered, pulling her close. "I could have spent my whole life with someone else and never known what it felt like to truly love someone. You saved me, Sarah. You gave me a reason to become the man I wanted to be." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected, leaning into his embrace. "That is what love does. It makes us brave. It makes us better. It heals us." They stood there together, watching the fireworks light up the sky, celebrating the birth of a state and the life they had built together. Sarah's hand drifted to her scarred cheek, tracing the familiar lines. She no longer saw them as marks of damage or loss. They were part of her story, part of what had brought her to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful life. Owen caught her hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed her palm. "I see only you," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago in that general store in Naco. "Always have, always will." The years continued their gentle march. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Owen slowed down, proving himself every bit as capable and dedicated as his father. Catherine was a perfect partner for him, raising their children and helping manage the business side of the operation. Emma and her husband settled in Tucson, where he taught at the university, and she performed with the local symphony. They visited often, filling the ranch house with music and laughter. Sarah continued to paint, though arthritis in her hands made it more difficult as she aged. She worked smaller now, intimate canvases that captured moments rather than sweeping vistas. A series she did of her grandchildren playing in the creek behind the house sold out within days of being exhibited. In 1920, Sarah and Owen celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. The family gathered at the ranch for a party that seemed to include half of Arizona. Friends came from across the state, people whose lives Sarah and Owen had touched over the decades. Former ranch hands, business associates, fellow artists, families of children Sarah had mentored in their own artistic pursuits. As Sarah looked around at the crowd, at the faces young and old, at the life she and Owen had built together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she had almost missed. This joy, this love, this family. If she had given in to fear that November day in 1883, when Owen Oakley first asked to court her, none of this would exist. Emma played the piano that evening, a new composition she had written especially for her parents. James gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. The grandchildren performed a little play they had written about their grandparents' love story, complete with costumes and exaggerated accents. Catherine had made an enormous cake, and Mrs. Patterson, now nearly 90 but still sharp as a tack, told stories about the early days when Sarah had hidden in the back room of the general store. "I knew," Mrs. Patterson declared, pointing at Owen with her cane. "The first time I saw you two together, I knew you were meant for each other. That boy could not take his eyes off you, Sarah, and you tried so hard not to notice, but I saw those glances you were stealing when you thought no one was watching." Owen raised his glass. "To Mrs. Patterson, for being wise enough to push us together and patient enough to let us figure it out ourselves." As the party wound down and the guests departed, Sarah and Owen found themselves alone on their porch once again, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. It was their favorite place, this porch they had sat on for 36 years, sharing dreams and fears, joys and sorrows, the mundane details and the profound moments of a life lived together. "You remember what you said to me that first time?" Sarah asked quietly. "After those men pulled off my bonnet and you found me crying." "I said a lot of things that day," Owen replied, his arm around her shoulders. "You said you saw only me, not the scars, not the damage, just me." Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner, her love, her best friend for more than 3 decades. "That was the moment everything changed, the moment I started to believe that maybe I could have a future after all. You gave me the same gift," Owen said softly. "You saw past the broken man who had run away from his failures. You let me be someone new, someone better." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the night settle around them. The ranch was quiet, the guests gone, the grandchildren tucked into various beds throughout the house. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, the everyday work of maintaining a life and a legacy. But tonight was for reflection, for gratitude, for love. Sarah thought about that terrified girl she had been, hiding behind her hair and her bonnet, convinced that no one could ever want her. She thought about the courage it had taken to accept Owen's courtship, to believe his words, to open her heart to the possibility of love. She thought about all the moments since, the 1,000 tiny acts of courage and faith that had built this life. The scars were still there, faded now to barely visible lines beneath the wrinkles of age. They would always be there, a permanent reminder of that terrible night and the long, painful recovery that followed. But they had lost their power to hurt her. They were simply part of her face, no more significant than the laugh lines around her eyes or the gray in her hair. Owen had taught her that, with his unwavering love and acceptance. He had taught her to see herself as he saw her, as a complete person worthy of love and respect and happiness. "I would do it all again," Sarah said suddenly. "Even knowing about the accident, about the pain and the fear and all the difficulties. I would do it all again because it led me here to you, to this life." Owen squeezed her hand. "So would I. Every hardship, every struggle. All of it was worth it to end up here with you." They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, then climbed the stairs to their bedroom hand in hand. They had shared this room for 36 years, this bed, this intimate space where they had loved and laughed and comforted each other through all of life's trials. As they settled in for the night, Owen pulled Sarah close, her back to his chest, his arms around her waist. It was how they always slept, had slept since their wedding night, safe in each other's presence. "I love you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Owen replied, his breath warm against her ear. "Forever and always." Sarah smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, that she was safe, that she had found her happy ending against all odds. The scars did not matter. They had never really mattered to the people who counted. Owen had seen past them from the very beginning, had seen her, truly seen her, and had chosen to love what he found. That was the real miracle, she thought as sleep claimed her. Not that her scars had healed, but that Owen had loved her despite them. Not that her life had returned to what it was before the accident, but that she had built something even better from the ashes of that terrible night. The fire had tried to destroy her, but she had survived. More than survived. She had thrived, loved, created, built a legacy that would outlast her. The ranch, the paintings, the children and grandchildren, all of it was testament to the power of love to heal, to transform, to redeem. Owen had given her that gift with his simple declaration all those years ago. "I see only you." 4 words that had changed everything, that had given her permission to stop hiding, to start living, to believe in the possibility of happiness. As Sarah drifted into sleep, wrapped in Owen's arms, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not been easy. There had been pain and fear and struggle, but there had also been joy and love and triumph. She had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. She had created art that moved people and inspired them. She had raised good children who were raising good children of their own. She had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something beautiful. The scars remained, a visible reminder of that night in the barn. But they were also a reminder of everything that came after. The courage it took to accept love. The faith it took to trust Owen's words. The strength it took to rebuild a life from the ruins of her dreams. The scars were her story, written on her skin for the world to see. And it was a good story, she thought. A story of survival and love and second chances. A story worth telling. In the years that followed, Sarah and Owen grew old together with grace and dignity. They celebrated 40 years of marriage, then 45. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own, giving them great-grandchildren to delight in. The ranch passed fully into James's capable hands, while Emma's musical career flourished in Tucson. Sarah painted until arthritis made it impossible to hold a brush, and even then she taught younger artists, passing on her knowledge and her love of the craft. Owen worked the ranch until his body simply could not manage it anymore, then supervised from the porch, offering advice and encouragement to James and the hands who respected his experience and wisdom. They were fixtures in Naco, the old couple who had built something lasting and beautiful. Young women with scars or disabilities would sometimes seek Sarah out, drawn by her story, looking for hope. She always made time for them, sharing her experience, offering encouragement, reminding them that the right person would see past surface damage to the treasure beneath. Owen died peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 76. Sarah woke beside him as she had for 44 years, but this time he did not wake with her. She held his hand and wept, grieving the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But even in her grief, she felt gratitude. They had been given so much time together, so many years of love and companionship. Not everyone was so blessed. The funeral was massive, attended by hundreds of people whose lives Owen had touched. Sarah stood beside their children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. She knew Owen would not have wanted her to fall apart, to give up. He would have wanted her to keep living, to keep creating, to honor their love by continuing to embrace life fully. And so she did. Sarah lived another 12 years after Owen's death, surrounded by family, continuing to paint when she could, mentoring young artists, sharing her story with anyone who wanted to hear it. She never remarried. Owen had been her great love, and she was content with the memories of their time together. Sarah Zimmerman Oakley died in 1940 at the age of 99, in the ranch house Owen had restored for her so many years before. She passed away in her sleep, surrounded by photographs of her family and her own paintings hanging on the walls. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren mourned her passing, but they also celebrated a life fully lived, a love story that had inspired generations. At her funeral, James shared the story his mother had told him many times. About the night his father had found her crying in the general store after cruel men had mocked her scars. About how Owen had touched her ruined face with such tenderness and said those words that changed everything. "I see only you." "That was who my mother was," James said to the gathered crowd. "A woman who learned to see herself through my father's eyes, who learned that love is not about perfection, but about acceptance, about seeing and being seen, about choosing each other every day through good times and bad. She and my father built something beautiful together, not despite her scars but including them, making them part of their story rather than the whole story." In the years after Sarah's death, her paintings became highly collectible, valued not just for their technical skill but for the story behind them. Museums across the Southwest featured her work, always including her biography, always telling the story of the woman who overcame devastating injury to become a celebrated artist. And always, the story included Owen Oakley, the cowboy who saw past the scars to the woman beneath, who loved her with a devotion that lasted a lifetime. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The house was preserved carefully, maintained as it had been in Sarah and Owen's time. Visitors could see Sarah's studio, still set up with her easel and paints. They could sit on the porch where she and Owen had spent countless evenings talking and dreaming. They could walk the land and see the vistas she had painted so lovingly. But more than the physical legacy, Sarah and Owen left behind something more precious. They left proof that love could transcend physical damage, that the right person would see beauty in imperfection, that courage and faith could build something lasting from the ruins of tragedy. They left a story that inspired people to look deeper, to see past surface appearances, to believe in the possibility of love even when it seemed impossible. In a small museum in Tucson, alongside Sarah's most famous paintings, there hangs a photograph. It shows a young couple on their wedding day in 1884. The bride wears a simple cream dress, her hair arranged to reveal rather than conceal the scars on the left side of her face. The groom stands beside her, tall and proud, his hand on her shoulder, looking at her with such obvious adoration that even in a static photograph, the love between them is palpable. Below the photograph, a placard tells their story in brief. But visitors who stand before it often find themselves moved to tears by what they see. Not the scars, though those are visible, but the love, the absolute certainty in that young man's eyes that he had found his treasure. The tentative hope in the young woman's expression, the beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. "I see only you," Owen had said to Sarah on that pivotal day in 1883. And he had spent the rest of his life proving those words true, teaching Sarah to believe them, showing her through 1,000 acts of love and devotion that she was beautiful, worthy, cherished. That her scars were simply part of her story, not the entirety of it. That love could heal wounds deeper than any fire could burn, and Sarah had learned that lesson well. She had let herself be loved. She had opened her heart despite her fears. She had chosen courage over comfort, vulnerability over safety. And in doing so, she had found a happiness more profound than anything she had dreamed possible before the accident. She had found a partner who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he found. She had found her home, her purpose, her joy. That was Sarah and Owen's legacy. Not just the ranch or the paintings or the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward, but the proof that love could conquer fear, that acceptance could heal shame, that the right person would see past surface damage to the treasure beneath. They left behind a story of hope for anyone who had ever felt unworthy, unlovable, too broken to be wanted. They proved that beauty was not about perfection, but about being truly seen and choosing to see in return. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. The ranch house stood solid against the landscape, weathered by time but still strong, still standing. Inside, Sarah and Owen's great-great-grandchildren played and laughed, living their own stories, building their own legacies. But the foundation remained, built by a scarred woman and a cowboy who saw only her, who loved her enough to teach her to love herself. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond this life, Sarah and Owen sat together on a porch under endless stars, holding hands, watching the life they built continue without them but because of them. Together still, as they always had been, as they always would be. Forever bound by the love that had overcome every obstacle, every fear, every scar. Forever remembered as proof that true love sees not with eyes but with the heart, and what the heart sees is always beautiful,